It's always a privilege to follow the member for Rushcliffe, the father of the House. Can I also join the member for Holborn and St Pancras in wishing the Prime Minister a speedy recovery? We entirely understand why she's not here today, and fair play to her coming along and doing Prime Minister's questions and taking time at the dispatch box yesterday as well. It was good to note, of course, that the DEFRA Secretary said so many kind words about the Prime Minister. But then again, the Tories are often kind about those who used to lead them. Mr. Speaker, what a situation to be in, debating a no deal. Next week, we will be 1,000 days on from the EU referendum. Today, we're 993 days on from the EU referendum. And as the member for Rushcliffe rightly pointed out, 16 days away from exit day. Now, Vote Leave backers, and it's a shame the Trade Secretary has left his place at the moment, Vote Leave backers told us that this was going to be the easiest deal in the world. The easiest deal. And we had nothing to worry about. Yep. Well, like much else from those who back Leave, these promises were not kept. And it's good the DEFRA Secretary is in his place, because he must take a huge degree of responsibility for the mess that we are in today. Because not only has he had the 1,000 days since the referendum, he's had his entire political life to plan for this. And yet, 16 days out, we're planning for the worst kind of leave, the kind that we were told would never happen, because this would be the easiest deal in the history. And on that point, I'll go away to the member for Totnes.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. Can you think of any circumstance under which a consent form would be valid if it was signed 1,000 days beforehand without knowing the exact procedure that you were giving your consent to?
The member for Totnes makes a valuable point, as she often does. Before an election, before a referendum, it is expected that we publish manifestos, white papers, discussion papers, you name it. And that is so those who win a referendum or an election can be held to account for the promises that they made critically before any vote was cast. That is a basic of our democracy. That's a very fundamental of our democracy. And the mess that we are in just now, and Mr. Speaker, it is a mess, shows why Brexiteers like the DEFRA Secretary avoided scrutiny during the EU referendum, and then when we were presented with the cold, hard reality in government, with civil servants who work hard and present the facts, these are denied, often by those who used to be in post, some of his former colleagues. Now, in the very few examples where we have some concrete proposals, promises weren't kept. I'm not just talking about the £350 million extra for NHS that was never forthcoming. The DEFRA Secretary himself promised that Scotland would get immigration powers. Yeah. And we need those powers. Yeah. We need those powers. Good for our nation, good for the economy. Now, I've raised this on a number of occasions in this House, and my honourable and right honourable friends have raised it as well, as have others. And yet, when we raise it, we are told it is not a matter for the government. He's a senior minister. If we can't hold him to account, who do we hold to account for the promises that were made, the broken promises that were made? Vote Leave. Who do we hold account for that? It's a basic for our democracy, and our democracy has been let down, and let down badly. This is a making of his making and his responsibility. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that I was late to emojis. And I have to say, they've come in handy. I don't know where I'd be today without the unicorn emoji. Any right-thinking politician worth their salt during this debate will have found it extraordinarily handy. It is the must-have accessory for a decent-thinking politician in 2019. And here's a lesson. Politics is about taking responsibility for each and every one of us here. And on that point, as a good example, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. The DEFRA Secretary has told me on at least a couple of occasions from the dispatch box that he believes other European countries will be looking enviously at the United Kingdom's withdrawal agreement. Do you think that might explain why he was so unwilling to take an intervention from me and so many of our colleagues today? Because that surely can no longer be the case.
Well, you see, this is the thing. Just like that promise, every other promise fails to stand up to scrutiny, which is exactly why the DEFRA Secretary would not take any interventions from the SNP benches, because the SNP benches have a clear position. We know what we want. And the DEFRA Secretary should be ashamed of the role, frankly, that has been played in the past by Vote Leave and the promises that have not been kept. Now, he also said that the House has been very good at saying no. Now, let me give him, given the implications of the vote, and I'm going to remind him of this, and I'm going to remind other members of this in terms of taking responsibility. After the vote, the Scottish Government took the responsible step. They put together a group of experts, because we on this side of the House still think that from time to time it's worth listening to experts. That included diplomats, academics, colleagues from other political parties who have got something to say as well, a former European Court of Justice judge, to look at ways forward. And then they came up with a compromise deal 2.5 years ago. And that was put together by experts, by colleagues from other parties. Did they respond to that compromise deal from these experts? No. Nothing of the sort. It was the most thought-out plan to this mess, and certainly a lot more than we've had so far. No wonder we're in a situation whereby we're talking about a no deal. Just reflect on that for a moment. The disaster economically, socially, in terms of the future opportunities for young people. Yet almost 1,000 days on, we're still discussing and debating a no deal that should have been taken off the table a day after the referendum. I'll give way to the honourable lady.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's making a very powerful case. Does he agree with me that to deliberately and willingly be prepared to inflict a no deal on the people of this country, in terms of the hardship and the chaos that would cause, is literally really the actions of a rogue state? And it really is quite bewildering that there are still members on the opposite side who seem to think that Brussels is going to be intimidated by the sight of us putting a gun to our own head. That strategy is not an effective one.
As usual, the member for Brighton Pavilion makes an excellent point and has indeed been one of the few sane voices that we have heard throughout this debate in terms of her interventions and the way that she stands up for her constituents and for others in the United Kingdom as well. I noted the other night, about this no-deal situation that we're in, that one of the Conservative MPs, in fact the longest-serving Conservative MP in this House, described the headbanger wing of the Conservative Party. Now, I'm not sure what the name of the other wings are, but I was quite taken with that their own members are talking about a headbanger wing, which clearly must be a sizable proportion of the Conservative Party. And when we're still talking about a no deal, I also note the words reportedly of the Dutch Prime Minister, who has allegedly said a decision to vote for no deal is like the Titanic voting for the iceberg to get out of the way. Now, the Chancellor seems to get this, and today in his spring statement the Chancellor talked about a smooth and orderly transition that would be threatened by no deal. He knows that it would threaten jobs and wages, yet we still debate it, and we still haven't ruled it out. Now, I'm not sure which wing the Secretary of State for Scotland belongs to, be it headbanger or some other, but he claimed the other week, and I'm sorry he's not in his place, but he claimed the SNP wanted no deal. Now, Mr Speaker, I don't have the experience of the Secretary of State for Scotland, but let me remind him that the SNP was the first to come out with a compromise, as I've outlined. We're the first to ask for an extension, and last week we even put down a very simple parliamentary motion about ruling out a no deal. Now, I know the Tories try and turn democracy on its head and claim defeat is in fact victory, as we just heard from the DEFRA Secretary. But surely that is even a step too far. We wanted to rule out a no deal, and the Secretary of State could easily have voted for our very simple motion. And let me also remind the Deputy Secretary of this, and I hate to break it to him. Tories lost the last election in Scotland. Again. The SNP won the last election in Scotland. Again. And guess what? Unlike his party, we kept our majority in the seats in which we stood. So if he wants to talk democracy, if he wants to talk winning, he's very welcome to take some lessons from this side of the House. And as far as the negotiating tactic goes, it's as if we're in a situation on no deal, and hearing what the Chancellor said today, that the Prime Minister has shot herself in one foot and then wants us to shoot herself in the other foot, just to show everybody how terribly serious we are. And we know that today's trade tariffs will hit our industries, not least the food and drink industry, in which jobs in my constituency and others rely, and for which the DEFRA Secretary has responsibility. Indeed, and the Trade Secretary is back now. The Trade Secretary promised that the UK would, and I quote, replicate the 40 EU free trade agreements that exist before we leave the EU, so we've got no disruption of trade. Now, Secretary of State, how's that going for you? No, going well? No, not going very well, is it? And the problem is, this is not just a political problem for the Conservative Party, as the Treasury bench seems to suggest. This is a problem for our public services. It's a problem for jobs. It's a problem for looking forward to the future. It's not just a Tory civil war you're fighting amongst themselves. It's a problem for us all, and I'll give way to the honourable member on that.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. Can I just take him back a few sentences when he talked about the general election? I don't want to delve into the success of the SNP or whatever, because he actually made a very important point, which is that in the 2017 general election, this government lost its majority. Does he agree with me that on that basis it also lost any mandate for a hard, no-deal Brexit?
As usual, and the Honourable Lady and I hope she doesn't mind, we'll clash every now and again, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying that. And she said the other week that there are times I might regret her sitting there, and she might well be right. But actually she makes a powerful point, a very powerful point, and she made it on the night of the election as well. It's a powerful point. This is a government who lost a majority. This is a government who lost support. And yet this is a government who want to do untold damage. And it's no wonder the DEFRA Secretary is walking away now, who want to do untold damage to jobs and the economy. And he can't even sit here and listen to it. And the Scottish Government have looked into it. The Scottish Government have done their work on it. Actually, do you know what? This will be good. Let's hear it then. If you can defend why you lost your majority and still pursue this nonsense hard deal Brexit.
I didn't lose my majority. Mine went to a record level of 25,725, albeit with no main party opponent, but there you go. Chris Philp.
Well, I had a different point to make, which I'll come to, but actually the Conservative Party's share of the vote went up considerably, and the SNP lost a third of their seats at the last election. But the more serious point I wanted to raise is this. The Honourable Gentleman and the Shadow Secretary of State have drawn attention to some of the dangers and risks of a no-deal Brexit. And it's not the government's desire to see a no-deal Brexit. It's not mine either. But by ruling out a no-deal exit entirely, you are by definition either deciding never to leave or to accept terms no matter how bad. Which of those two is the honourable gentleman advocating for?
10 years.
No, I thought that would be good. No, I wish I had my Democracy for Dummies book here. So let me start. In terms of the vote, the SNP won, the Tories lost. OK, in terms of the votes. Let's just nail that straight away. And in terms of no deal, the SNP put down a motion last week that was voted on, and members across this House voted for it, which was to take a no deal off the table in any circumstances. And the member opposite who raised it could have voted for that, did he?
No.
No chance. Absolutely no chance. So he could have done it, and he did not. Now, in terms of a no deal that he talked about, the Scottish Government have had the courage of their convictions to publish their analysis. And what we've seen from that is the devastation that the Chancellor has warned of. That it would be the equivalent of over £1,500 for every man, woman and child in Scotland, a drop in Scottish exports up to 20%, a hit in migration and hitting our EU nationals as well, opportunities for young people through lack of freedom of movement and Erasmus gone, and pushing the UK into recession again. And I will give way to the Honourable Lady on that.
I'm grateful for giving way. Given that nearly 50% of the people across the UK voted to stay in the European Union, given that most business, if you ask them, would actually prefer to stay in the European Union, given that the Secretary of State today himself said and evoked the prosperity of this country as member of the European Union, do you not believe it is absolutely unacceptable that staying in the European Union is seen as an unpalatable option?
Staying in the European Union is, and the Honourable Lady makes a good point, is the best deal. The best deal that we have is the one we currently have as a member of the European Union. Now, in terms of public services, this government is spending £4.2 billion on no-deal preparation that we could have taken off the table 1,000 days ago. £4.2 billion, which is not going into hard-pressed public services. £4.2 billion that's going into government mess-ups, ferry contracts that we don't need. Now, in terms of public services, these will be further hit by a no-deal Brexit and overall by Brexit. And let me say this, this will hit the most vulnerable in society. It will hit our public services that have already been dealt a blow by a decade of austerity from parties of every colour in this House. And before I conclude, and because I respect the honourable gentleman, I'll give way one final time to him.
Having said that this should have been taken off the table 1,000 days ago, perhaps he could explain why he put his name to a conclusion of the Foreign Affairs Committee report published 2 years and a day ago, saying that making an equivalent mistake of not preparing for no deal would constitute a serious dereliction of duty by the present administration.
Just how much could we have saved had we taken that off? Because the government hadn't taken the responsibility of taking no deal off the table as they should. And if he wants to refer to that report, that is also the report that said a no deal, yes, would be bad for our European partners, but it would be worse for the United Kingdom, and that's something that he put his name to, and other Brexiteer colleagues from across the House put their names to as well. That they would be prepared to hit the UK economy. They would be prepared for that hit, and he signed up to that very report, and I know it was in that report. It's strange as well that now all we hear is not the benefits of Brexit, but rather we're limited to ministers telling us it won't be that bad. These increasingly poor excuses. I was hearing one the other night, which was that we're in a parliament of Remainers. Now, I'm a Remainer. I'm somebody whose constituency voted to remain, whose nation voted to remain. It does not feel like a parliament of Remainers to me. It certainly does not. And the complaints that those extremists will never be happy. It's about damage limitation. The Brexiteers, including the Trade Secretary and the DEFRA Secretary, have blown it. And I will not vote to make my constituents poorer and less well off because of their mistakes. And let me remind them that it's through the single market that we are wealthier, through its rules in areas like workers' rights and parental rights that we are fairer, through joint action on climate change that we are greener, through work with the Medicines Agency, sadly departed, and the air quality through agreements that we are healthier, and the impact is being felt now. And even yesterday with a report showing that 1.2 trillion eye-watering sums had been relocated from the UK, mainly to areas like Dublin. It is no wonder that similar-sized, independent and sovereign states like Denmark, Ireland and Finland see their futures as part of the European Union. Now, I hope that Mrs Spellman will move her amendment tonight. That is critical. I hope the Right Honourable Member for Meriden will move her amendment tonight. I think that's important. We need to have no deal taken off the table, given the damage to public services, given the damage that it will do to our democracy, given the untold damage. We have two different views. One is of a state being like our neighbours and being joined and pooling our sovereignty and working together as an independent sovereign state. And we have another which is a UK which is isolationist, which is poorer, which is more remote, and which is going backwards. And nowhere emphasises that more than the fact they haven't taken no deal off the table. So let's push the amendment and take no deal off the table tonight.